Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fortmaster, and welcome back to the Game Theory reaction. And you're probably noticing that today's upload is a little different than what I usually do, because today I'm uploading two game theories instead of a game theory and a film theory. And now that's because I was out of town for a week being a scoutmaster at a camp up north. So I missed a couple of, game theories when they came out. So just to keep things, spiced up and fresh, I decided that yesterday I'd release both film theories that I had missed, and today I'm releasing both game theories that I missed. Which, speaking of, this one is, FNAF, did Fazbear really steal everything? Which, after Secret of the Mimic came out, that's definitely one of those questions that everybody was asking. Because it seemed like Fazbear basically, took everything. The MCM was already working with them, making, costumes and was making, the prototypes for the Freddy Fazbear animatronics for FNAF 1 and stuff like that. But, Afton, who I would presume is, higher up in the company, was consistently, making change orders, making things go behind, wasting money, also that MCM could go under and have, Fazbear Entertainment buy them up. One of the things that Edwin said in, his tapes was that his dad told him to not trust them, which I'm assuming is talking about, Fazbear Entertainment, which could possibly point towards, Fazbear Entertainment being, having a more sordid history than we thought, that, that even existed before Henry and Afton became the heads. Now, there's also the whole thing talking about, the possibility that Henry might not be as good as, we presumed he was. Because, again, he seemed to be on at least a very close relationship with Edwin, given that Edwin called him Hen instead of Henry. But then again, in FNAF 6, he did say, in the recording, that he had let things go on. So my whole headcanon is that, it's not that he was, malicious, but more just turning a blind eye. And, after doing that for so many years, a lot of bad stuff happened. But yeah, I mean, questions aside, let's see what they actually say in this video. So yeah, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Other reaction video will be up in the corner. And if you like this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because over 3/4 of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed, and I'd very much like that to change, because my next big goal is hopefully hit 10,000 subscribers. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Everything we've known about FNAF was a lie. Or was it? On the surface, it seems like our old favorites, William and Henry, didn't actually create anything, and instead just stole it all from newcomer Edwin Murray. But how much of that is really true? And what if I told you, theorists? The answer is entirely up to you.
Is he talking subjectively or literally? Subjectively as in, we don't actually know the answer, so right now it could be completely up to your mind? Or is this literally as in, we have actual control over the narrative at this moment? What do you mean by that?
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, and welcome to our fourth and final episode in our Secret of the Mimic extravaganza. Woo! It has been a wild ride, loyal theorists. We've uncovered the truth about the Murray family timeline, we've solved the mystery of Mexes, and we've managed to figure out secrets of a previously suspected mimic, Sun and Moon. But the biggest question that I have yet to solve, and the main question I had going into this game, wasn't about the Mimic, or Edwin Murray, or security breach. I wanted to know the truth about the origins of Fazbear Entertainment. William and Henry. These two characters we've known about since the beginning, and yet know very little about. Where did they start? How did they create this empire? Who were they, really? But friends, nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me, or the rest of the internet, for what we were about to witness.
Spring lock assembly may be required.
No! Whoa! Are you kidding me?
Oh my god!
Henry didn't
Oh
even
my
invent
God!
the
Oh my...
To be fair, that reaction was several hours into stream, where all we'd witnessed so far was invention after invention that we thought had been a Fazbear invention for years now, only to discover that Edwin made it. Like the Data Diver, a device used to access certain points around Murray's costume manor that looks an awful lot like the Faz wrench we use in Ruin. Or
okay, with that, I could very much see it more just being, you know, like seeing like a similar shape, because the Data Diver, all we see with the Data Diver is, you know, it seemingly carries data and unlocks doors. Now, granted, with the Faz wrench, when we use it in Ruin, it's pretty much we only use it for that as well, but it's obviously a much more high-tech, you know, piece of equipment that, you know, that I would imagine with this little dial probably has more settings than just that.
what about the massive list of characters? Happy Frog, Mr. Hippo, Orville, Monty, Roxy, Moon, Foxy, Chica, Music Man, Helpy, even the wet floorbots from Security Breach share similarities to the Cleanovac. They're all here in Murray's costume manor with designs, schematics, and costumes strewn around the facility. Edwin and his wife Fiona designed them all. It felt like everything we'd known over the last decade had been a complete lie. It was never William and Henry, it had all been Edwin. Or had it? See, while at first it definitely reads that way, there are clues hiding in voice memos, text logs, and just in the physical designs themselves that show us the truth is a little more nuanced. So let's jump into our unfinished helpful cuts, friends, because we've got to get to the bottom of this and figure out whether William and Henry invented anything or whether they are just complete frauds.
Well, okay, so from what we see in the game, I very much believe, at least probably early in his career, Afton didn't invent anything. Because again, like, he was basically stripped, even before the company closed, he was stripping it for parts. Like, poaching employees, giving them, like, bribing them to bring other employees over, telling them to bring schematics. Like, I can totally believe that William, again, from everything we've known, was like that. We know virtually nothing about Henry at this point besides, you know, what happens in FNAF 6. So, yeah, I'm a bit more lenient on him just because we don't know him.
First off, there is one important thing we have to clarify. Did William and Henry actually steal Edwin's inventions? And the short answer is no. I've mentioned in a past few theories little tidbits of information about this, but while it was clear Fazbear had some shady business practices and were actively stealing employees trying to obtain company secrets, which is not totally legal, they never actually stole Edwin's intellectual property. Edwin was a contractor, and so they would have contracted him to make stuff for them, like the demo of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that we see in the R&D department. And that whole process would have included contracts that decided ownership, which we sadly never get to see. I can tell you, though, as a former contractor myself, typically those contracts favor the client, the person who came to you to be a contractor. When I would shoot or edit a video for someone, that would then go back to them and they would own the final product. I didn't own anything. But what about Chica, who was made for Chica's Party World, not Fazbear? Or Roxy and Foxy, who were built for Edwin's TV show idea? Those were definitely Edwin's, and Fazbear surely had no rights to them.
Well, again, the whole Chica's Party World thing, we have no idea how that worked. Was it just like another company, like under the Fazbear umbrella that was just, you know, a different restaurant chain? Or was it like a fully independent restaurant chain that Fazbear eventually just kind of bought up the rights to as well? Now, again, with the whole thing with, like, buying up MCN, I can totally see them, you know, getting the rights to, like, Foxy and Roxy and, you know, stuff like that. But again, Chica could, given that Chica was for her own restaurant, that we don't know the direct affiliation with Fazbear, I mean, there's, again, fuzzy gray area there.
Well, until they did. One of the text logs you can obtain is from Willie A himself, and while the message is cut off a bit at the start, the intention is very clear. Quote, software development and the entire MCM catalog. We would love to keep you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. Afton was offering Edwin a position at Fazbear because he had just bought MCM, its remaining employees, the ground it's built on, and most importantly, its catalog of characters and inventions. Fazbear now owned everything.
I mean, isn't that basically what Chuck E. Cheese did? Okay, I'm forgetting the name now, But yeah, that's the whole thing where, like, Chuck E. Cheese technically has this gigantic back catalog of characters that they can pull from at any given time, but just don't use. When, like, more than half of them were from, like, what was it, Showbiz Pizza, I think? So Chuck E. Cheese owns the rights to those characters. They just don't use them anymore. And I have a feeling, I'm 99% certain that that's pretty much what happened with the majority of the characters. Like, Fazbear owned the right to, like, Happy Frog, Roxanne, you know, all that sort of stuff, but just had them, you know, sitting in the background until, you know, Security Breach came along and they decided, hey, we need to replace Foxy with something new. Hey, you know, let's replace the fox with a wolf, you know, that sort of deal.
Never stole it from Edwin. They just stole all his employees, drove the business into the ground, and then bought the rights so that they could claim it as their own. But let's be honest here, that's kind of a small nitpick in this whole thing. The real issue here is that we believed Henry and William were these great inventors, and yet it seems like they just kind of bought everything and didn't make any of it themselves. How could Henry claim
trapped in prisons of my making
if they weren't his making at all? So let's take a look and try to clear things up. Henry may not be the originator of most of the characters we've attributed to him over the years. R.I.P. Chica was Henry's first theory, but that doesn't mean he didn't invent any characters. From the minute you step into Murray's Costume Manor, you will find one item that appears everywhere in the facility. Pizza boxes from Fredbear's family.
Fredbear's, yeah, never mind.
Now, while we are visiting MCM, the place has been abandoned for a bit. But what that means is that while the place was active, so was Fredbear's Diner, which makes sense given Fazbear Entertainment was a thing and had the means to buy MCM in the first place. They need some way to make money. We also see Fredbear and Spring Bonnie on a number of posters throughout the place, identical to the ones we found in Security Breach. But notice what we don't see throughout MCM. Despite promoting posters for the characters of Fredbear's, we never see versions of Fredbear or Bonnie within the main facility. And that is because of this line.
Every one of my creations are available for purchase or lease.
For Edwin to be able to say that, he would have to own the rights to the characters. But the fact that Bonnie and Freddy are missing implies that those two characters were not created and owned by Edwin, but instead William and Henry. Edwin has posters on the walls because there's clearly a long-standing relationship between the two companies, and based on his audio log telling us that they should
just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do.
It seems like he has worked on the diner in some way. So the posters are just him promoting himself, going, hey, you know this successful franchise? Well, I helped make that. But
I mean, again, like, something like that, I could very much see it basically being like, again, like, maybe, you know, unlike a lot of the other characters, Henry or William designed the suits, but then just contracted Edwin to actually build them. Like, again, we've seen, you know, again, Edwin has a whole thing about, like, spring locks and stuff like that. Who's to say that he even invented the spring lock technology in the first place? Who's to say he's not just licensing it to make more suits for other people, and then, like, Fazbear gets a small cut of it every time somebody else buys a suit?
Can't show any of the costumes or animatronics for Fredbear and Bonnie because he doesn't own the rights. They were created and owned by William and Henry. So, nice big tick for them there. But that leads us into the big discussion around Fazbear.
Spring lock assembly may be required.
No!
No! Hazards that could cause issues.
Oh my god!
Henry didn't even invent the spring
Oh
locks.
my god!
Did Edwin invent the spring locks? Before this point, we've been under the impression that it was Henry who invented the spring locks, as during the Silver Eyes trilogy, we're pretty much told that outright. Quote, these are spring locks, one of the first ones Henry made. But now in Secret of the Mimic, we see plenty of spring lock suits. We see messages about Edwin making them, and we even get to travel around inside them, which is kinda horrifying. However, there is one big detail that stands out pretty quickly, which made me reconsider whether this was another acquired contraption. The fact that we cannot be killed by the spring locks. Spring lock suits are notoriously finicky, causing fatal injury at the first sign of sudden movements or water, and yet we managed to fall through an entire floor and yet sustain no injuries. It's almost as if they are not the same kind of spring locks, and that is exactly the case. We receive a text log from Edwin during the game that specifically talks about updating the spring locks to sustain water damage and be okay. There's also the fact that the original spring locks were designed to be both suit and animatronic, while the new ones seem to only really be suits. And finally, the versions of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie down in the R&D department, while looking somewhat like the versions we know, have colored exoskeletons made of metal, rather than the felt-based material that would stain and discolor like we know from modern Springtrap. And to top that off, there's an audio log in the same area that talks about spring locks being used for a long time before this moment.
It would be so much easier to keep using the spring locks.
The fact that there have been spring locks used for Hen, while these new improved metal versions of the spring locks for Fredbear and Spring Bonnie currently only exist down here in the facility, it tells us that there are other spring-locked versions of these characters in existence, felt-based ones that use the old water damage-prone designs. So that's it, case closed. Edwin made the new spring locks, but Henry can still have made the originals, right?
I mean, that would work. I'd work.
I really
be okay with that.
To be true. Believe me, I did. But when Ash and I went back to find all the secrets on GT Live, we discovered this message on one of the Mrs. Helpfuls to Edwin from Fiona.
I'm worried about the new suit design. One of my costumers, Vic, nearly lost his hand today. All he did was spill a can of pop and the thing snapped shut like a bear trap.
Fiona is worried about Edwin's springlock designs, and the one her team member was wearing does end up having an issue with water damage. It's almost like that text log we read earlier was a response to Fiona's request to check out the problems, because Edwin was involved in the creation of the original designs. This isn't the only time Fiona is worried about Edwin rushing out designs that later cause problems either.
You have a lot of new ideas and new projects coming in. The staff can't keep up with all your changes, but I think you need to step back a little and focus on one project at a time.
This is a pattern of behavior for Edwin. He sprints through dozens of projects, moving on to the next one so fast that his previous invention isn't fully finished, leading to a bunch of failures and returns like we see in the text logs. And so the idea that these springlock suits that were incredibly dangerous and faulty were also Edwin's creations actually makes a lot of sense for his character. And yes, there is a chance that the original springlocks were potentially a collaboration between both Henry and Edwin. But right now, I'm just not sure the evidence is there.
I mean, depending on what evidence gets shown in the future, again, the idea could be that Henry designed the initial prototypes, and given that they were going to be used at like multiple restaurants and stuff like that with, spares, it would probably be more than his capabilities to mass produce. So again, hire out, Edwin and his company to produce them, again, I've heard stories about stuff like that where, I'm forgetting one, but it was a story of a company where they were making like some sort of, what was that, adhesive? Or like flip, again, I can't remember. But, over the years, they'd worked, like they were given the original recipe like years and years ago. But over the years, as new ingredients came about, or they had to replace things due to laws, the company worked with the company that manufactured using the recipe, worked with the original creators to like update the recipe so that it would still work the same. So, I mean, I could very much see that, like, maybe Henry getting, busy with things, given that, he's potentially running a company here, he might have not had time to work on the Springlocks anymore and just kind of shoved all Springlock development over to Edwin, since, that's his company and that's what he does. And then, Edwin, being the way he is, kind of did everything half-assed. Again, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it until we get some proper proof.
The books say that Henry was the inventor of the springlocks, but that's a very different continuity. The games have never made that claim. The closest we get is
prisons of my making.
But here, Henry is talking about the normal animatronics, the ones that Edwin never finished. And so you could plausibly say that Henry was the one who made them. Edwin did say that Henry was the one changing the designs.
I got the change order from Hen last night. Why change it now? Now they changed their minds. Well, we're so close to final. The new concepts are, frankly, creepy.
But he never mentioned spring locks. That doesn't make this a retcon, it's just a realigning of our understanding between the different continuities of these characters, which is basically what Secret of the Mimic did with all of the book continuities. In the novel trilogy, Henry made the spring locks, but in the games, it was Edwin. Who knows, maybe it'll turn out to be Afton in the movies. But thanks to the company failing and Edwin's eventual demise, the new spring locks for Fazbear's characters were never finished. Fazbear just had to keep using Edwin's old designs, so I guess you could say that it was karma that got Afton in the end. In more ways than one.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Speaking of good old Willie A, what did he actually do? I mean, we've always known he's a bit of a scumbag, so I don't think his lack of inventions would be all that surprising. But just like I think we can still credit Henry with the creation of the normal animatronics, I think there are a couple of things Afton can be credited with creating himself, namely the Funtime animatronics and the Scoop. In Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator, we found blueprints for these devices, and they all have copyright attributed to Afton Robotics. Of course, we know that Foxy isn't his OC, that one firmly belongs to Edwin and Fiona, and the whole stomach hatch design definitely borrows from Edwin's springlock designs. But the animatronic part, the weird wiry bodies, we don't see anything like that from Edwin. The Scoop of course, bears resemblance to the springlock crane that we find in MCM, and that we then saw in Ruin. They have the ability to scoop something out of a costume or springlock suit or whatever. But all the stuff about remnant injection and storage, that's all Afton, maybe. Which means at this point, we're pretty even. Edwin did make a lot of stuff that we thought were Henry and William, but that doesn't mean they were completely incompetent or unable to make stuff themselves. However, there is one more thing that we need to discuss. One more invention that, if it was claimed by Afton, could affect the entire timeline as we know it. You see, everyone,
what would that be?
I mean everyone who played this game or watched someone else play it have been very quick to point out the similarities between David Murray and Afton's son, the Crying Child. The most obvious similarity is their name. Thanks to a friend of the channel Hyperdroid and a handful of other theorists, last year we came to the conclusion that Crying Child's real name was also David Afton. But there's so much more to it than just a name. Their bedrooms look almost identical, and both of those bedrooms are in houses on top of a hill near a tree and near their father's work. They're both missing mother figures in their lives, with fathers who spend too much time working. One of the collectibles we get is David Murray's purple plastic telephone, the same one we see in David Afton's bedroom, along with a bunch of other similar toys. David Afton is famously scared of Foxy, having ripped off the head of the Foxy plushie, and his brother Michael bullying him wearing a Foxy mask. David Murray also is afraid of the pirate Fox, crying when Edwin uses one of the Foxy hand puppets on his first birthday.
Ahoy there!
Oh, honey, you're scaring him.
Both of them even have a birthday party for them coming up on a Saturday, only for them to die on that same birthday. Everything about these two feels identical to a strange degree, almost as if they're the same person. But obviously, as I've mentioned, David Murray is dead, so they cannot physically be the same person. But you know who is still alive and kicking? The thing that was created to become David Murray, M2. And this is where we hit an interesting fork in the road. There are two ways we can look at this information. There's the more literal approach, where the reason these two characters feel so similar is because they are the same character. M2 takes on the role of David, and Afton adopts it as his child. Or there's the less literal approach, the idea that these similarities are actually parallels designed to point us in the direction of a different kind of Fazbear theft, that they took more than Edwin's creations. They claimed his entire story. And because this is the big finale...
Claimed his story? What do you mean by that? Claimed his story?
I wanted to do something special here. Secret of the Mimic has been all about getting us to re-evaluate our past theories, our past ways of thinking. It showed us that we can't hold on to theories too tightly, that we need to be open-handed and explore all the possible options to us. And so, rather than stand here and try to convince you that one interpretation is right over the other, I wanted to present you with both options, explore the repercussions and flaws of each of them so that you can come to your own conclusions. So, on the left is the ending where David Afton is M2, and on the right is the ending where Fazbear is trying to rewrite history. So go ahead, make your choice, theorists. I'll see you on the other side.
Ho! Okay, so we got multiple choice here. Interesting. Actually, thinking about it, yeah. I mean, I was kind of wondering, FNAF theory videos are usually a bit longer. A 50-minute one is a bit odd. Let's start off with the William is actually innocent one. Let's see what this goes, and then, because I could very much believe that it could be just coincidence would be the wrong word, but I mean, because in the Lithuanian community, or at least the one where us, I was the first young kid to be called Lucas. That's my actual name, Lucas Lukai. And because of that, I know 2 other people that are younger than me that both are named Lucas. My mother said when she when I was a kid, it's when she told them my name, it's oh, what a beautiful name, all that sort of stuff. And throughout my life, I've had a really weird habit of meeting groups of people with the same name. In elementary school, I had 2 friends whose both names were Chris. As an example, so I mean, I could very much see it being maybe Afton named his youngest son David because the name was on his mind because of David, of Edwin's David dying, and then stuff happened after that. But yeah, let's go on with innocent here, and then we'll go on to thief afterwards.
Ah, I see the concept of a Fazbear conspiracy caught your interest. Can't say I blame you. You're a theorist. Video game conspiracies are literally what we do best. And this connection between these characters immediately seems suspicious. It couldn't just be a coincidence, right? Oh no, my friends. This rabbit hole is big. Big enough to fit every iteration of William Afton we've had throughout the years. No, not you. Get out of here. Honestly, why do you even exist? What I'm trying to say is that a coincidence implies this kind of similarity has only happened once. However, thanks to Secret of the Mimic, we've actually got a bunch of quote-unquote coincidences between the original set of games and the new lore we've learnt about from this new game. Just look at one of the other important Murrays, Edwin. He is a brilliant robotics engineer whose life is defined by 2 things: his incredible world-changing inventions and the soul-crushing loss of his wife and son. He's a genius haunted by tragedy, whose own creations ultimately become twisted into something monstrous and turn against him, killing both him and his son. Now, flip over to what the original games told us about William Afton, a creative robotics genius whose entire family story is defined by loss and tragedy at the hands of the killer robots he created. Baby kills Elizabeth, Fredbear kills David, and Michael is then killed by the Fun Times. We also have the mysterious and absent Mrs. Afton, who we've theorized about in the past being represented by Ballora, the musical ballerina from Sister Location, mostly because of the song she sings.
Why do you hide inside your walls when there is music in my halls? All I see is an empty room, no more joy, an empty tomb.
Again, doesn't that sound familiar? Almost like it's exactly how M1 Fiona feels. Her husband locked away inside his walls, trying to work on projects, not spending any time with her.
I miss you.
All with the room of their dead child laying empty, waiting to be filled by M2. But wait, there's more! There's the old house on the hill with a secret underground workshop, the Murray house above MCM and the Afton house above Sister Location. There's a robot designed to be a babysitter that essentially fails at their duty. Security Puppet was designed to protect Charlie, yet she dies, and M1 Fiona, who was designed to protect David, and yet he also dies on her watch. There's the burning down of a facility, but the main villain survives it. There's mysterious molten metal that works as a kind of power supply for the machines created, giving them life, as it were. You have the primary villains of the franchise, Afton and M1 Fiona, wanting to put their children back together, and there's then the wonderful and ever underutilized Baby, who gained sentience after the accidental death of William Afton's daughter, Elizabeth. William then rejects her, banishing her to a secret underground lair he built beneath the house. A near beat-for-beat parallel of M2's story of rejection from Edwin. I could go on, but I think you get the point. The number number of times the stories from older games paralleled the stories of the Murray family cannot be purely coincidence. It's a pattern. They say history is doomed to repeat itself, but when it's this much, and when it involves as shady a company as Fazbear, you know there's something more going on. And that something is bigger than I could have ever imagined. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason these things all line up so perfectly is for one simple reason. The stories from the first 7 games, the ones that told us everything we knew about Henry, Charlie, William, Elizabeth, Michael, and David, are entirely made up. Now, to some degree, we knew this already. In my theory crafting livestream, I kept bringing up the idea that in Help Wanted, we are told point blank that the games were just that, games.
Were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic.
The books corroborated this with stories like The Monty Within, where kids refer to Pizzeria Simulator as an in-universe game, where the mediocre melodies come from. But we also learned from Tape Girl that the whole indie dev story wasn't entirely truthful.
It's an elaborate cover-up to make light of what happened.
And so we basically used that line as a way to explain away some of the inconsistencies, but really the stories were just as we originally thought. However, since then, we've had a few more pieces of evidence that would seem to suggest they're not fictionalized versions of real events, they're just fiction. One of the earliest stories from Tales from the Pizzaplex is Help Wanted, and in it we learn about Steve Snodgrass, a developer that was hired by Fazbear to make the first 3 to 4 games to make light of the rumors of murder and death surrounding the business. But as he works on it, his mind begins to fall apart thanks to sound illusion discs. Not only did Fazbear never tell him what the story really was, he was working purely on rumors, he was also being driven insane. So how trustworthy is that? And in the Walmart exclusive Tales story Monster, yeah, we're going that deep here, we learn about a kid who writes stories about a pizzeria owner in the local paper, claiming that he is a serial killer and abuser, turning the whole town against him. In fact, the stories he whips up sound an awful lot like the FNAF 1 newspapers we see in the game. But throughout the story, we're told explicitly that these stories are completely fictional, fabrications made up by a kid with a grudge. And if that's the case, we're being shown that these FNAF 1 newspapers also can't be trusted. And with that in mind, it makes you question what else can be trusted. Of course,
God, if that actually is the case, that is honestly, like, heartbreaking. Because, I mean, again, I know, you know, the early timeline was just Scott, and obviously I hope he's become, like, a much better storyteller, you know, after all these years. But at the same time, like, just throwing out literally everything like that. And granted, I know, you know, still, you know, a theory here, but just the idea that that could be a possibility, like, that's heartbreaking, honestly. Just, like, all the time and effort just literally out the window.
Of course, I'm not saying that absolutely everything is fake. If we have corroborating evidence, especially from the Steel Wool era of games, the ones that took that meta approach and revealed to us the real world that these games existed in, then we should be good to go. Like, we do know that William and Henry existed. They're mentioned in Secret of the Mimic audio and text logs. Likewise, a FNAF 6 location definitely existed because we find it underneath the Pizzaplex. And clearly, there was an incident or incidents that Fazbear wanted to cover up with a set of video games in the first place, as we're told about in Help Wanted. However, what I'm saying is, what caused those events might now be something entirely different, because outside of those in-universe games, we don't really have any evidence for them, and so we can't rely on them as 100% true, or even rely on them happening as we saw them at all. And when you open up that can of worms, suddenly everything we thought we knew is thrown into question. Was William Afton actually a murderer, or just an awful business owner? Did Michael die and come back to life as a purple husk? Was anything ever really possessed by spirits to begin with? Maybe instead of a murdery business owner with a bunch of ghost children possessing animatronics, it was always just a rogue AI that Fazbear got their hands on, they couldn't control, and had a habit of stuffing people into suits that could also mimic the behavior and voices of children.
Oh, God. Again, just what I said before. Like, throwing that all out, I mean, like, granted, I know, you know, Scott is much more into, like, sci-fi and stuff like that, but just the idea that you literally throw out one of the, like, core, like, traits, like, one of the most widely known things of FNAF, you know, the fact that you have these like robotic animal, animatronics, and they're possessed by the souls of dead kids, and you just throw that out. God, that feels really bad.
I mean, Scott did say that was the kind of story he was more interested in telling.
I know there's a little bit of a divide with maybe me and the fan base. I have a tendency to lean sci-fi, even though I try to come back into the roots of the supernatural. So anything that involves possession of AI or possession of machines or circuitry, I love that sort of thing.
That would be an absolute PR nightmare. In fact, it would have been more than a nightmare. It would have been the PR apocalypse. Admitting to the world, oh yeah, our proprietary self-learning AI has absorbed the trauma of its creator, developed a violent streak, and has now started stuffing customers into animatronic suits. We don't know how to stop it, and we are liable for all of it. That would be the end of the company. But if you had a scapegoat, like a jerk boss who happened to die on the premises in one of their faulty spring-lock suits, oh yeah, it was totally him. Our founder was secretly a monster. We all knew he was a jerk, but we didn't think he'd go this far. He did everything, but it's over now. The monster's gone. Case closed. And things like FNAF 6. Was it a gathering of ghosts, or was it a corporate cleanup? A recall, where Fazbear did what it could to contain their rogue AI, sending something like a recall signal or a specific frequency or data packet that would force any machine running the Mimic program to be drawn to one location. And that famous speech, it isn't a heartfelt eulogy, it's Fazbear cementing Afton's role as the fictional villain, putting a final neat bow on their scapegoat, with the real fire probably just being a calculated attempt to destroy all the evidence of their rogue AI. And for a while, they probably thought they succeeded. And so they built the Pizzaplex on top of the old establishment, only to reintroduce the Mimic via some old circuit boards. William Afton, his family, their story was created to turn Fazbear's failure in stopping the mechanical mess they adopted into a spoopy ghost story. And not only did they rewrite Afton's history, but to be sure that people wouldn't trace it back to their acquisition of Murray's Costume Manor and Edwin's Mimic, they took parts of Edwin's story and planted it onto their founders. Fiona was a puppeteer, and so M1 was translated into a puppet created by Henry to protect his child. One of the most traumatic events of Edwin's life, the death of his son, became the death of Afton's son, the Bite of 83. The echoes of M1's Fiona's grief over her lack of connection with Edwin after the death of their son turned into a verse from a video game, A Ghost's Lament. One of M1's final messages to Edwin,
"It is me. I'm Fiona,"
became the words screamed by another overarching and vengeful spirit. Even the words that Edwin actually spoke to M1 Fiona about M2, that it could never replace his real son, are now just the infamously confusing line we hear in a fictional show.
The baby isn't mine.
Fazbear may not have stolen Edwin's inventions, but they did steal his story, twisting it and removing all memory of Edwin and his contributions from the equation. His merits and faults split apart and grafted onto a scapegoat to keep it all in-house, while also absolving themselves of all wrongdoing. But while I think there is a lot of evidence to support this whole idea, from the parallels in the games, lines in the books, even Scott himself, there's just one issue that I cannot shake. It kinda sucks as an answer. It's basically...
Literally, what did I just say? Like, again, the idea that, we need to kind of take like a lighter-handed approach with theories, and you need to kind of like, get, and you need to kind of let go of some of the older stuff because, it's old and might not have been thought through the best. I can totally get behind that. If you need to like tighten up the lore and make it a little bit more watertight, I can totally understand that. But like, throwing out literally everything that is basically the franchise and basically doing like one giant retcon saying, oh hey, it was the like there are no ghosts haunting, there's no like mass murderer that's like killing kids in like a bunny suit, like, which were things that gave FNAF its flavor, which made it so popular, which made FNAF. No, we're literally just gonna throw that all out, and now it was just a runaway AI the entire time. I honestly hope that's not the case, because that would honestly ruin FNAF for me. Because, again, I've never been the biggest horror fan. Honestly, the biggest horror thing I've ever really gotten into was FNAF. And it's all been about the lore and trying to piece together this giant jigsaw puzzle. Just, a story over many, many years. And just, like, not only the thought of, like, literally all that time and effort by the literal hundreds of thousands of people all across the world that have done it, just to be literally cleaned off the table and thrown out. But it just seems so, I mean, for lack of a better word, cruel. Like, I can totally get behind, you know, the original era is over and things change as the story progresses. Like, new villains. We're not dealing with, like, haunted animatronics so much anymore as, you know, rogue AI. I can understand the story evolving. But to retroactively, like, remove everything before it, like, that's horrible.
Basically turning around and telling us, yeah, the last 10 years of theorizing, it doesn't matter, start over. And that is just super disheartening for us fans who have spent all those years trying desperately to take small pieces of the puzzle and put them together in such a way that we create a cohesive story. We've spent 10 years building up our ideas of Afton, of Henry, of the crying child, only for this idea to essentially flush them down the drain. It's one of the reasons why some of the early reactions to Secret of the Mimic's lore were so angry and frustrated, because Secret of the Mimic's whole thing was revealing to all of us that we didn't really know the truth about what was going on, even though we thought we did. It was revealing information we basically had no way of knowing until very recently, which is tough compared to the quote good old days, where even though solving FNAF was hard, it felt like the pieces were all there for us to use, rather than key information being withheld for the sake of a twist. And this theory would kind of just perpetuate that idea. It would also make theorizing incredibly challenging going forward, at least more than it already is. We can speculate about how some elements might fit together, as I've done a little bit today, but it's just that, speculation, because we don't have any sense of how much those old games can even be used as evidence. I'm sure a bunch of you out there hate this idea. Heck,
yeah.
I don't really like it either. We here at Theorist have been big proponents of Scott rebooting the franchise and its story for quite some time. This, however, wasn't what we meant. But there is some hope, because this, like every video, is a theory. And if Secret of the Mimic taught us anything, it's that we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle at this point. All we can do is interpret what we have as best we can, and that can be done in a couple of different ways, like we've done with today's theory. If this ending isn't up your Bonnie bowling alley, you can always go and check out the other ending for today's theory that is a little more on the keep everything canon side. At the end of the day, the important thing is that we are open-handed, be willing to explore all the avenues and work together, because that is how we solve this weird and wonderful franchise. And right now, I'm going to be doing just that by going live with John FNAF, Toast, ID's Fantasy, Hyperdroid, and Dorko to talk about all of these interpretations and more. So come by, say hi, and in the meantime, remember, it's all just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
Oh god, okay, so that was one ending. Man, this is going to be a long reaction. Jeez, yeah, this is definitely going to be a long one. Whew. So, I guess in the meantime, let's go down the William is a thief route and see how that plays out. Because again, I did not like that one I did not like that one or the implications of it at all.
Ah, so you've chosen to take the evidence presented more literally. You want to believe that the reason that David Murray and David Afton appear to be one and the same is because they are one and the same. Or at least that both Davids are being played by the same character, M2. Interesting choice. Well, let's take a look at the evidence and see how Afton shapes up in this one. Before we can talk about what this path would solve, we have to figure out the how of it all.
Yeah, because again, the biggest problem with this is, granted, I mean, I could potentially see that's why, David was, bullied so much by, his older brother. If, his older brother knew that his younger brother was in fact a robot and, wasn't quite fond of that idea. Though at the same time, again, we've seen, in the good ending, M2 can get very small, in the size of a child. But the problem would be the costume. In the FNAF books, the Silver Eyes, Henry builds the Robo Charlies, and they're apparently so well that nobody can tell that they're robots. But that's not the case with the Mimic here. The Mimic is like a robot designed to fit into costumes. And from everything we've seen, the costumes in World might be good, but you can still plainly tell that they're costumes. So how would Afton trick basically the world into thinking that, hey, this little short robot is actually my son.
How was William able to get control of M2 and turn it into his son, David, the crying child Afton? Well, that comes down to the secret ending of Secret of the Mimic. You see, in that ending, we complete moon.exe. We get some glitched permissions that allow us to access special doors in the Murray household. And from there, we fix M2, turning them into the perfect mimic of David. M2 then goes to bed and shuts off as the game fades to black. This is the only ending where M2 is completely fixed, which allows him to live on as a child, as David, and therefore, in the future, could become the crying child that we know from the original games. One of the text logs we get from William directly confirms that he owns the land Murray's costume manor is standing on, including the house Edwin's parents built on the top of the hill, the one where M2 now sleeps. With Fazbear's ownership of the land and the IP and the inventions inside, that M2 would now belong to William. And so, with the disappearance of Edwin, William would likely show up, at least eventually, to claim what was his. And when he did, he would come across this incredible little machine, mimicking Edwin's son, David. Now, Fazbear already knew about this special animatronic that could fit into any costume and learn any routine.
Someone told them about M2.
But seeing it actually imitating a child, essentially bringing a kid back to life, that would absolutely have intrigued Afton. In the Silver Eyes trilogy, it's clear how much he idolizes characters like Henry, those with animatronic and creative genius, who were able to imitate the spark of life itself. He wants to reach their level of genius, to understand, to go even further beyond what they did. Sure, he could have just taken M2, turned it into scrap, or shoved it into another costume, but if he could figure out how it ticked, then he could create more and help his empire grow. It's for this reason that we see camera feeds down in the sister location bunker, displaying the FNAF 4 bedroom, the same bedroom where M2 was sleeping. He is monitoring M2, watching its every move. He threw different stimuli at it, high-pitched frequencies that mess with its vision, creating animatronics that looked like the stuff of nightmares, all to see how lifelike this thing truly was to a child. Afton was trying to understand how it worked. That's also why we see the Funtime animatronics using technology that allows them to mimic sounds and actions. It was Afton trying to replicate that same technology, but it wasn't fully there yet, because William wasn't the original creator, although they clearly did manage to mimic one thing correctly. In order not to raise suspicion, Afton would need to make M2 look like another one of his kids. We see masks down in the sister location bunker, Afton's attempts to create realistic human costumes, one that M2 would be able to wear out and about, which is why when the Funtimes encounter Michael Afton all those years later, another one of the Afton kids, they knew what they had to do. They mimicked what they saw M2 doing all those years ago, jumping inside the skin of one of the Afton kids in order to explore the world. They were able to...
God, I hadn't even thought about, the weird freaky faces in sister location. I had honestly completely forgotten about them. God, so maybe Afton did make a really good costume for him too. But then how would that... If the crying child was in fact a robot this entire time, what would that mean for the rest of FNAF? Because again, I guess that does make, the whole put you back together thing make a little bit more sense. But, like, then there's no crying child spirit or anything. Because again, it's a robot without a soul.
To mimic an action, but they lacked the nuance of understanding. Just like M2 would stuff people into suits because as far as it could tell, that's just where human bodies went. Feels like there's maybe a bigger lesson we could take away from that. But there are a bunch of other pieces of evidence from previous games that suddenly begin to line up when we continue down this train of thought. For example, why does Mike bully his brother? Of course, older brothers can just be mean sometimes. I should know, I am one. But if David Afton is actually a robot kid wearing a skin suit and they are getting all of this attention from their father, well, that would make any kid jealous and want to lash out. They aren't his real son. Why is he getting all the attention instead of me? It's not fair. Michael then goes on to have an obsession with the show The Immortal and the Restless, which the most famous and frustrating line is,
"The baby isn't mine."
We've tried to make sense of this thing for years, but now we might finally have an answer. It's not that one of the kids was adopted or that Afton had a kid with another woman. It's literally not not a baby. It's a robot mimicking another man's child, David Murray. In the security logbook, Michael even comments that he relates most to Clara, as she is the one who seems to see the world she lives in as crazy. Just like Michael doesn't understand how people can't tell that this is a weird robot kid that his dad is claiming to be his sibling. But the biggest thing that this solves is actually less to do with M2 itself, and more how the mimic existing in these early parts of the timeline might solve the most infamous line in all of FNAF. I will put you back together.
Yeah.
When this line first showed up, it confused the heck out of all of us. Up until this point, Afton had been speaking in a bright gold text using the color FFF57, and he starts off that way during his final speech to the dying crying child too. However, when we then get to the put you back together part, it's a paler shade of yellow, FFFA0. It was confusing as there weren't really any other characters left to claim that color, nor did it make sense for it to be anyone other than Afton. It wasn't helped that in Ultimate Custom Night, when we're seemingly playing as Afton in Eternal Purgatory, we get lines from Nightmare Fredbear that repeat this idea.
Let me put you back together.
It felt like Scott just made a mistake and used Ultimate Custom Night to rectify that mistake. But now, I offer you an alternative solution. What if the reason it's a similar color to Afton's gold text, but slightly different, is because it isn't Afton, but someone or something pretending to be Afton, mimicking him, if you will. Remember, while we've been focusing on M2 as David Afton, there's another character that Secret of the Mimic introduces to us. M1, Fiona Murray. All she wanted to do was to put her son David back together.
I beg you, put it all aside and fix M2.
And in the secret ending, that's what she got. But then Afton swooped on in and took her son for himself. She was stuck inside the cradle, the Mex's machine. She would have been powerless to stop him. But, as we've talked about before, she was taken away and likely installed into Fazbear's system. So when Michael took things too far and got M2's head crushed inside of Fredbear, her motherly instincts kicked in. She managed to take over the walkie-talkie and speak directly to M2, promising to put her child back together again. Meanwhile, Afton would have seen M2 as broken and of no use. If anything, he'd actually kind of been an inconvenience to him based on Fredbear's dialogue. Plus, he couldn't even fix him if he wanted to. He was just trying to figure out how it worked. He hadn't actually solved it. And regardless, he now had his new fun times who were using some kind of mimicking software. Those were more than what he needed. So he threw M2 away into the bowels of the rundown facility he owned, MCM, and cemented the whole thing up to start over. But I suspect M2 wasn't completely broken. Edwin beat this thing to a mechanical pulp, and yet it managed to carry on. So once again, just like in the 1970s, this violence towards M2, it getting crushed by Fredbear, taught it how to be violent again. It began to rebuild itself with spare parts, again, now waiting for someone to free it so it could take its revenge. All the while, M1 was working on putting her son back together. She was uploaded to Fazbear's system, took control of the Pizzaplex and a young woman called Vanessa. And with Vanessa's help, she was able to start rebuilding her son, a new mimic robot that looked just like David did before he died. That's right, people, the Gregbot theory is alive and well. We theorized in our very first security breach theory that Gregory is actually a robot version of the crying child, due to just an avalanche of evidence. The fact that they look the same, the fact that Gregory doesn't have any records or parents, that he was living in the Pizzaplex, that Gregory is referred to as broken rather than injured, that when Glamrock Freddy gets Roxy's eyes, he says,
"You look different to me."
That he has CRT-style vision when Vanny gets too close with what sounds like a sound illusion disc. There's his robotic actions that he takes in the books. Quote, he cocked his head and studied Tony for several seconds. And to top it all off, we have the post-it room, which is covered in notes, starting in binary, but then beginning to turn into phrases we know David Afton would have been saying, like party time or birthday time, like a robot coming into consciousness and learning the identity it's supposed to be taking on. The party was for him, after all. All the signs point to him being a robot version of the crying child. It just made so much sense. And now I present you with this image. You can find it during the parachute ending of Secret of the Mimic, and it's of David sitting on top of a hill with M1. Now tell me, does that look familiar to you? Because it
Yeah, there's a picture of that. Wait, is it in Security Breach or Ruin? But Oh god, it is.
It's almost identical to the image we get from the burn trap ending in Secret of the Mimic, with Gregory sitting on top of a hill with his protector, Glam Rock Freddy. We are once again being shown the same looking scenario because they are meant to be showing us the same characters. Gregory is M1's attempt to recreate her broken child, David, M2. That might even explain why we get Gregory dropping the elevator on Cassie at the end of Ruin. It could be M1 or M2 controlling the system to get Cassie to come back, or it's because Gregory is still following his programming, acting under the orders of his mother, M1, to bring the family back together. Now, before anyone gets too mad at this idea, I recognize it's not perfect. For starters, while there's a bunch of evidence that does work when you look at it through the lens of M2 is the crying child, the trouble is, it basically all hinges on the secret ending being the canon ending, which is kind of hard to prove at this point.
Yeah, well, given that, you know, to get the secret ending, you need to complete it in New Game Plus, where you get a one additional collectible in the form of the Tiger Rock plush, just out of nowhere, just sitting in the office.
Especially without the DLC or a sequel. Outside of that, there just isn't a lot of evidence for this line of thinking. You essentially have to go in with confirmation bias. The idea that your belief is correct, and so you can find evidence that works because you already believe it to be true. That's not to say that this couldn't be the answer. All I'm saying is that right now, with the evidence we have, it can feel like a bit of a stretch. There's also the issue of M2 being in the basement of Ruin. I still firmly believe that the Mimic we meet in Ruin is M2 from Secret of the Mimic. So by having M2 go on to be the crying child, you have to jump through some weird hoops to make it survive Secret of the Mimic, but still end up locked away before Ruin happens. And those hoops are entirely speculative. It's
very much so, yes.
Point A and point C, and essentially
not knowing
just
point
making
B,
up point B to fill in the gap, which isn't typically how I like to do things because it's speculative at best and fanficky at worst. There's also the small things, like why would we hear a flatline in FNAF 4 if David Afton was just a robot M2 the whole time? And of course, there's Gregbot, the most Marmite of our FNAF theories in recent years. Some people love it, and some people hate it. In fact, most people hate it. And believe me, I get it. I would love for some of our human characters to just be their own thing rather than copies of others. Plus, with M2 down in the basement, it means we end up with 3 mimics running around. And that just feels unsatisfying from a story perspective. Let's just say Vanessa is also a robot like the movie novelization seems to imply, and just have a full set. And that was kind of the point of this whole experiment. If we've learned anything from Secret of the Mimic, it was that everything we thought we knew, at the end of the day, were just theories. We don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, and so we're left to interpret what we do have, and that can be done a couple of different ways. That doesn't mean a theory is wrong necessarily. It's just that nothing can be truly said with certainty. A new game or book or heck, a toy could drop and suddenly it's back to the drawing board.
God, honestly, if we get to the point in FNAF where the literal merch drops are altering the lore, I think I'm going to call it there as a fan of the series, because I've stayed with the series up to this point and loved, you know, trying to figure out the absolute quagmire that is this game's plot and story. But if it gets to the point where you're getting like plot hints from literal merch, I think that's a step too far for this franchise.
We have to be open-handed with these ideas, explore all the avenues, and find the answers we think work best. If you don't like this interpretation, that's okay. There's a whole other ending of this theory waiting. FNAF's lore is open to you. And to really nail that home, I'm actually going to be going live right now, after this episode goes live, with John FNAF, Rytos, Ides Fantasy, Hyperdroid, and Dorco, to talk about all of these interpretations and more in our live theorist talkback. So come by, say hi, and in the meantime, remember, it's all just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
Ah, God, honestly, I don't like either of these endings. I mean, I like this one more than the other one, because it kind of keeps, you know, the lore more intact than, oh, everything was literally a lion thrown out and, like, it was, like, a big like, cover-up or something like that. Get the idea that M2 was the crying child. Again, like, then where does the whole thing of the crying child needing to be put to rest and stuff like that? Because again, I mean, like, I know the first games have been kind of retconned to be, you know, slightly not completely viable lore-wise anymore, but like that just seems super weird. Ugh. God. Yeah, but that's definitely going to be it for now. God, this is going to be fun to edit. But yeah, that's going to be it. So yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.